guys for joining. Much appreciated. I'm sure people trickle in and trickle out as we go through here. My name's Alex Mcdougall. I'm going to share my screen with you momentarily here, and I'm super excited to join what Michael's put together here today. It's we're doing something that we've never walked through before. Myself and my co-founder, we run something called Bicameral Ventures. And essentially, this is the first time we've kind of gone through this presentation. We've been investing, building, making, breaking, working within this idea of distributed technology, and really the construct that technology's allowed us to connect on an exponentially larger basis than we ever have before. But it's destroyed our ability to actually trust each other individually. So we're consistently, and again, as we were just saying, in this digital and virtual world now, our ability to actually work in between each other and sorry, there's some feedback. Our ability to actually connect directly with each other is at an all-time low. So where we spend a lot of our time is in these ideas of technologies, frameworks, feedbacks, and constructs that allow people to directly connect with each other. And a lot of that starts out with this nugget of people. All of the constructs that we built are just people. All of the governments that we put in place are just people. So it's all just people all the way down. And so we've spent a lot of time writing and thinking and making videos about all of this stuff. And this is a talk that's designed to kind of bring all of that stuff together and really set out a framework by which we can get cross-functional experts all together in the same room and hopefully start making some decisions about how we can reorient the infrastructure of our future. So without further ado, the lizard and the machine, maintaining human integrity in a machine speed world. So the real danger is that humanity has Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Edward O. Wilson. And I love this quote because it really sets up what the challenges are with a lot of the paradigms that we have today. We're lizards, after all. We started out that way. I'm sure all of you have heard the concept of the lizard brain before. It's what makes us short-term dopamine addicts. It's what makes us manipulatable. It's what makes us predictable. It's what governs our fight or flight reactions. It's what governs our aggression. It's what governs a lot of sort of the subconscious actions that we take. And it's what we've built our humanity on top of, but it's still sort of sitting there at the bottom of our brain stack. But what's made us really the dominant species in the world is this idea of a human brain that we can flip into. It's these structures that we built on top of it, and when we've spent thousands of years coming up with ways that we can, through religion, morality codes, meditation, all of that stuff, we've come up with these ways that we can click into these modes that give us longer term thinking, give us the ability to embrace challenge, be collaborative and empathetic, be thoughtful, and just operate in this higher way. And what's really, really interesting and where we want to spend some time today is the machinery that actually executes on both of those is identical. So the machinery that actually executes on you when you're operating in lizard brain mode or in human brain mode is your synapses, your nerves, your body, your muscles. And it's the thing that makes you run away or that makes you react in a certain way or makes you eat a burger when you're in lizard brain mode. But it's also what artists refer to as flow, or athletes refer to as being in the zone, or even Buddhists refer to as being in the Zen state. It's when your brain and when your actual execution machinery is completely in sync, then you end up with being able to operate at this completely higher level. And so we've talked a lot and we've thought a lot about the human brain aspect of it. Where we want to talk today is really drawing some further analogies from what we can learn from that. And we're social animals. So individually, we have some chance of acting human on a fairly regular basis. We have some mechanisms to sort of abort our lizard brain, our amygdala hijacks, and slip into that longer term mindset and that ability to think bigger and think broader. But because we're social animals,
thanks very much.
Because we're social animals, we end up en masse. We essentially have zero ability to act as humans altogether. So it's a really interesting phenomenon that individually we're smart and empathetic and wonderful, but en masse we almost always act at our basis level. So the lizard brain sets our instincts. Our human brain really tries to override it. And then this machinery of our internal synapses and nerves is what actually executes on that. So taking a step back a little bit, the lizard brain only wants to eat and be safe. And we want to do that in today's world in a similar way that we did in 10,000 years ago in the savannah. And essentially what that looks like is we become these extremely simple and manipulatable creatures. And so the lizard brain isn't complicated. You poke a lizard with a fork or you poke a lizard and it'll hiss and act big. If you show a regular and modern human an image of a terrorist attack, it's going to demand increased immigration controls and be willing to sacrifice civil liberties. If you show a lizard,
A 阳这男的是
on mute. If you show a lizard a bunch of really strong lizards and a bunch of weak ones, it's going to side with the strong ones to destroy the weak. You show a modern human a bunch of cool, popular people drinking beer A, or a person by themselves drinking beer B, you know what's going to happen in that situation. And I think maybe most importantly is if you show a lizard the ability to eat a bunch of food or the ability to give a bunch of food away to a bunch of less fortunate lizards, you know what's going to happen there. And same with humans. En masse, we generally tend to take the opportunity to earn more money over giving away more money. And again, this makes us very, very manipulatable en masse. And so the vehicles to do that and to undertake that manipulation historically have been pretty blunt. Posters, propaganda, yellow journalism. They've been these big bulk things that prey on us when we're activated in the most lizard brain possible, in a crisis, when we're afraid, after an attack, or even when we're wasted. These are sort of the things that when we're most manipulatable and most susceptible to this type of stuff, but they're not really that effective and certainly not that personalized. Now, we've entered into a world the last 15 or 20 years whereby we've essentially created this virtual digital playground for ourselves where we're in lizard brain mode almost all the time. Google, Netflix, Amazon have essentially created this digital world where we can anonymously bully and be tribal with people. We can instantly get dopamine hits of social likes. We can instantly get commercial fulfillment immediately. And we never ever have to see a piece of content that doesn't agree with us. So we're essentially addicted and just sitting here in this lizard brain mode where we're just the most manipulatable. And the entire business model on the back end is selling that attention. And we're using this godlike technology that we've been blessed with and we've developed ourselves in order to essentially make us the most predictable we possibly can be and then monetize our attention on the back end. And that's effectively the business model of our entire digital construct today. So, I mean, our modern platform's business model is based around keeping us in lizard brain mode and then selling the ability to manipulate at an industrial scale. Consumer predictive analytics sounds strategic and intelligence and a good strategy, but really it's just that. It's lizard brain manipulation at industrial scale. Now, to react to revulsion or to the lizard's behavior is to make the mistake of applying criteria that are only appropriate to the business of being human. And I love this idea and construct of the lizard's going to be lizards. That's what they're going to do. And so when we think about these businesses, are they doing that in order to be evil monoliths? Are they looking to manipulate the world at scale for some evil particular reason? No, we're applying too much of a human filter to that. In reality, these corporations are essentially giant lizards themselves, except where humans, we have our lizard brain modus operandi of eat and be safe. Corporations have maximized shareholder value. And so they take the shortest, most aggressive, most reactionary route in order to do this one core instinct that they've been imbued with of maximizing shareholder value. Now, where humans, we can flip into human brain and we can try and go for other things and we can try and really evolve and solve for different paradigms. Corporations don't have that mentality or they don't have that framework even yet. And we've tried over the years to give them something else to aspire to, but we really haven't put the effort and the thought in, and we've never even really tried. whether it's venture philanthropy, externalities pricing, V corporations, impact investing, corporate social responsibility, social IRR, stakeholder maximization. These are all ideas that we've thrown out and tried a little bit, but we've never actually given our corporations this idea of human style things to aspire to. And so I love this lizard in the suit. We end up with our corporation's lizard brain, similar to how we just want to eat and be safe, just wanting to maximize profit and just wanting to maximize share price. And we have this human brain on the right side of, we don't know what our corporations should or should be doing in that sense. And just like we have in ourselves this execution machinery of business processes, technology, within humans, we have our execution machinery of nerves and synapses. Within our corporations, we have business processes, and most importantly, technology. And as our technology gets faster and smarter and smarter and better, it's essentially blending into something similar as to our brain processes, where we decide what happens in our brain and our internal machinery executes on it. Our individual limbs and nerves and synapses don't think about what's happening when they do something. And our corporate machinery, our corporate brain and synapses are getting towards that with the level of automation that we've built into them. So corporations can't override their lizard brains like humans. And honestly, we've never even really asked them to try. But a machine is even more blameless and more sinless than the lizard we were talking about before. It's got no intentions whatsoever but our own. So a lizard ended up with its instincts based on evolution. How did a corporation end up with this instinct? Well, we've always built our corporations to try and maximize profit or to try and earn money. But it wasn't really at an industrial scale until about the 1970s, when shareholder value maximization really became popularized as a theory. And essentially where it came from was a bunch of people who owned companies didn't want to run their own companies anymore. So they said, okay, I want to hire somebody to run this company, but how do I know that they're going to do a good job? Well, first, what does a good job even mean? Is it environmental responsibility? Is it reputation? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it employee well-being? Is it community well-being? Is it money? All of those things are figuring out whether somebody's doing a good job of those is more challenging in the historical world than running the company yourself. So they said, these shareholders essentially said, well, if my employees are upset, they're going to leave. I'm going to have to hire new ones. They're going to be suboptimal and I'm going to earn less money. If the community is upset with me, they're not going to come and buy my product, so I'm going to earn less money. My customers aren't satisfied, then they're not going to buy my product and I'm going to earn less money. If I'm not a responsible steward of the environment, then the world's going to blow up and we're not going to have business and I'm going to earn less money. But there's always these long, circuitous, tangential reactions to the overall point that money equals good. And that's really what this all boiled down to in the end of, hey, we can't calculate all these other things that we want to, that we think about as what a good company does, but we can calculate how much money we've made. And the back end of that calculation is that the managers who are running these companies or running these corporations are also should be motivated by money. So if they are earning more money, therefore creating more good for me as a company, I will pay them more money and therefore they will have more good. And with that, we essentially completed the loop in our circular Excel model of society, whereby if we essentially say that if you're earning more money, then you're doing more good. Because if you're not doing those things, then you're not going to be earning money. So it's this really circular logic that becomes terrifying in several ways. And two of the biggest ways that it really breaks down. First is the timelines that are inherent in the money equals good are completely out of line with what is actually happening from an incentivization of people mechanics. So you can cut product quality in a quarterly basis and have your share price jump and then have your compensation to your manager jump. But you're obviously dissatisfying your customers over time. When you start thinking about externalities like the environment, that's something that's going to come home over 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And you're obviously not going to have your manager still be around to be incentivized by that type of reaction or that type of equivalency. But more importantly, I think, is at one point money probably did, or at least was a decent proxy for good, because you had humans executing on those decisions of whether to do something or whether not to do something. So you can say at the highest level, hey, maximize shareholder value. But if you have a manager who says, hey, I can earn one more dollar, or I can cause all of this, but it will cause all of this human suffering over here that technically doesn't have a dollar value attached to it, most managers would say, hey, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't know exactly why. I don't have exactly the framework to say why I'm not going to do it, but I just know that it's wrong, so I'm not going to do it. Now, when we were talking before about how we're automating these processes in our corporate machinery more and more and more, a robot looks at that problem or a machine-based execution strategy and says, hey, brain told me to get one more dollar. This has no value to me in my understanding of the world. I'm going to do that thing that earns me $1 over and over and over again. And I'm going to tell all my connected friends globally to do that thing that earns me $1 over and over and over and over and over again as well. So we've essentially ended up in this world where we've never actually been farther away from the money equals good paradigm, but we've lived with the money equals good paradigm for so long that we've sort of forgot that it's a proxy and not the actual end goal itself. So in a world where we're upgrading our corporate lizards execution machinery to this godlike technology, money no longer equals good. And we're starting to get the technology to actually figure out what good is and make it calculable, whether it's biometrics, whether it's this application of tangible philosophy and this whole movement towards that. We're starting to get the ability to actually maximize for something else. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Now, conspicuously absent from this discussion so far is this idea of governments. And they're challenging because everybody has such a deep-rooted philosophical position on how we should be governing, whether we should be on the left, whether we should be on the right, who, what policies and all that stuff. But governments at their core aren't good or bad, they just are. Similar to Godzilla. This is one of my favorite answers from Cora on whether Godzilla is good or bad. Is essentially, if you take all the steps back, governments are just designed to maximize collective well-being. They're collective action problem solvers. So corporations, what that collective well-being is the biggest thing here. But corporations create a certain amount of it with what they do. Not-for-profits create a certain amount of it with what they do. And then the government should be what is filling in the difference via regulation, taxes, redistribution of resources, sometimes figuring out how to marshal resources around. But all of that's extremely challenging when governments don't even have the type of instinct that corporations do. They don't have a shareholder value maximization idea. What are they trying to do? Is it wealth? Is it connectivity? Is it happiness, utility, health, liberty, jobs, GDP? Hopefully it's not votes for the party in power, although that's how it often ends up working out. So we end up with this situation where the governments don't even have this lizard brain core thing to focus in on. In the West, it's more than anything, it's kind of GDP maximization and trickle down economics, but there's so much disparity around that. And then the human brain aspects or goals that are sitting on top of that are even less defined. And so you end up with a situation where we have no real unifying vision on what governments are trying to do. And we also have the machinery that is incredibly inefficient at actually achieving those things. So committees, elections, legislation, they're so far away from the private sector execution machineries towards a very hyper-specific goal that no wonder we have just this shit show of government up top that's a mess of conflicting incentives, short-term thinking, just inefficiency in an organization, because we don't have this organizing idea of what they're even trying to do, and even less, we don't have the machinery to actually help them execute on it. And more so, at least in the corporate world, we have the ability to say, hey, you've made more money for this company, so here's more money for you. We have this rough equivalency of money equals good. Then we rely on our generally corporate leaders to go up to government leadership role and say, hey, I no longer believe that. I actually think now that personal money is bad, and I'm all about this greater good when we can't even define what that greater good is. So it's no wonder to me that we're in such a mess from a government perspective, where we have effectively these individual lizards operating at this basic human scale at the bottom, these hyper sophisticated and really, really technologically advanced corporate lizards that are solving for this very specific goal and doing a way too good job of it. And then we don't have any sort of governing oversight or governing thesis that sits on top of that of how should we be organizing ourselves? How should we be organizing our resources? So as the proxy of money equals good has shattered, how can we leverage what we've learned about our own human brains to replace it? After all, it's just humans all the way up this chain. These are constructs that we've created, machines that we've created. One of my favorite quotes, "I'm the lizard king, I can do anything," by our dearly departed Jim Morrison. And because there's hope in all of this, that these aren't undefeatable super monsters that we need to create super weapons to destroy. These aren't evil machines hell-bent on destruction. It's just us and reflections of us. And we've programmed a lot of our institutions with our worst instincts, but man, we can program them with our best instincts as well. We've generated this machinery to be able to take what our instincts are up here and filter them down into an incredibly efficient mechanism for executing on those. But what if we just reprogram that instinct at the top? We don't need to go around and convince everybody one by one that something else is better than our money equals good paradigm. We just convince it at the top and watch it actually filter down through. So the 5 key questions that come out of this are, can we combine our human brains and this godlike technology to create better calculable proxies for good? And that is a massive question. And it's not something that's going to be solved by technologists. It's not something that's going to be solved by politicians for sure, by biologists or philosophers. It's going to be solved by a combination of everybody. Can we reorient this shareholder value maximizing machines to maximize for whatever this other thing is? There's going to need to be tweaks. There's going to need to be evolutions of it. What does money, equity, jobs look like when we're not trying to maximize for shareholders' equity? We've sort of stuck ourselves into this paradigm for 50 or maybe even 1,000 years, depending on how you want to think about that. What does all that do in the aftermath? I mean, money is a unit of account. It still has value as an exchange mechanism, just because it isn't the be all and end all of this new machine that we're trying to build. It still has value, and we can still use the same institutions and the same mechanisms. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to reinvent what the wheel is driving towards. Can we create corporate lizards that manipulate us at scale towards these better proxies of good? I would love to go onto Google and fall down a search content rabbit hole, and at the end come out to just wake up and be more knowledgeable, more balanced, more thoughtful, more empathetic. I don't want to have to think about and turn on my human brain all the time. I'd love to be manipulated into things that are good for me. But we need to figure out what that good is and what that paradigm leads. And then lastly, can we restructure governments to solve these collective action problems according to maximizing better proxies of good? So can we define what that big green circle is, and then figure out where corporations are in it, where not-for-profits are in it, and what actually needs to be done to maximize this new proxy of good? And if we're doing it at an individual level, do we need corporations to do that? What are the roles of all of these different pieces of the machine within this new paradigm? But it all starts with figuring out what that new calculable proxy for good is. And the answer to all of these is, of course, we can do it. We can do things today, we can do things tomorrow, we can do things the day after. We can start with better data paradigms, self-sovereignty of our digital identity, self-sovereignty of our profiles. We can move into personalized AI. We can use all of these data banks to help us and train us to be better and be smarter, and essentially maintain this human integrity within this machine speed world that we've created. We right now are operating as animals from thousands of years ago in this hyper quick, hyper machine speed, hyper efficient world. And there's this massive disconnect. So we either need to empower ourselves at the bottom level as humans, or completely change the paradigm so that we're being used by technology in a way that's good for us. And we can start with one and move into the other. This is all a roadmap, but it's going to be solved with a cross-functional lens. It's going to be solved by all of us working together from the various different disciplines and essentially collaborating on all this stuff. But it doesn't need to be 6 billion people who get convinced. It just needs to be the system and creating a new one and creating a better, more equitable one. So we're looking and taking all of this into a new Git book that is essentially an open source book. We've wrote and released it today, the first little bit of it at lizardandmachine.com. You can essentially see this presentation, the write down of it, and then a framework for how we think the next step evolves. But we want it to be collaborative. We want feedback from biologists. We want feedback from philosophers. We want feedback from technologists. We want feedback from finance people. We're essentially trying to build this consortium of filling in what those gaps are. What are these frameworks? Where do we move forward from here? But there is a way forward. There is hope that we can do this because it's all just humans at the end. Thanks very much. I'm happy to answer questions. I got 4 minutes left here.
Alex, one thing you talked about was the lizard brain, right? And so I actually am just like 1 or 2 credits away from completing my cognitive science.
Oh, amazing.
Very familiar with all this stuff. That's kind of what I was going with. It was so cool that you kind of just went right from the whole like analytic programming reptilian brain. How do you think that we can actually overcome these primal instances and actually build like protocols or just like how can we subvert our nature basically?
Yeah,
right? Like
great question.
If we have these things, and have you listened to Daniel Schlottenberger too? He's very, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a Michael Healy friend of ours.
Cool.
He talks about very similar things with like non-rivalrous games, and how that's primed into the limbic system.
Super interesting. No, I'll hit you up after and get his name. But in general, to answer your question, I think the simplest way forward, because it's always great to talk utopia down the line when we solve all of this shit. What can we do today and tomorrow? And I think the simplest way forward is right now we have this extractive data paradigm where we see the top 10% of our digital world, and there's all of this value that's happening or all of this data that's being extracted behind it. So Google's creating a profile of us, Facebook's creating a profile of us, the government's creating a profile of us, Chartbeat and all these random tracker companies are as well. It's not that hard to get all of that data back and correlate it and aggregate it around you. And so you can essentially, in 10 minutes of motivated trying with some proper technology that, not to talk my own book, we're investing in some of it, you can essentially create yourself this 360-degree data profile. And when you can start filling in and willingly put in the right type of data to essentially mine yourself, you can come up with a recommendation engine that's personalized around you that does all of the same things that Google's trying to do in the back end, that Facebook's trying to do in the back end, and essentially A, defend you and work on an even term with the algorithms that are operating on you when you're surfing around. But B, even reorient them and suggest content, suggest things that you need to do differently. Essentially take your goals of what you're trying to do and say, hey, here's how all of the actions that you're taking affect you and how you're feeling. Especially when we get more into biometrics, when you get more into wearables, when you get more into even EKGs, and as those get better and better, this data profile becomes more and more powerful. But what we're trying to optimize for needs to evolve and needs to actually change and get smarter and more human. So I mean, there's sort of 2 answers to that. The first one is just be aware. Like I'm doing a talk at Consensus Distributed in a week or so about just data hygiene, just understanding where your data is going, who's trying to do what to you, and just having the basic minimum of knowing that people are trying to manipulate you and always taking a breath and just pausing before you do stuff. And secondly, flipping that paradigm on its head and leveraging technology for yourself. We can do all of this other bigger picture stuff, but those are sort of the basic personal protections that we need to have to operate in this. I think there's a couple questions in the chat here. How have new data endpoints, product rating, online reviews informed/shifted some corporate priorities and considerations? It's a good question, and I think it's something that we see corporations talking about more and more. All of that word cloud that I put out of corporate social responsibility, stakeholder maximization. There's a pretty big business advocacy group recently that flipped over to saying stakeholder maximization should be the primary way that corporations organize. And I know I'm out of time here, so just finishing this point. And people are doing a good job of starting to think about it. But in the end, show me a corporation that's willing to lose money in order to do one of those things, and then we'll be in a different situation. So I think it's still, people are caring a lot more about these top line things, but it's always still about how it hits the bottom line. And until we're out of that paradigm, we're still going to be needing to organize ourselves and defend ourselves against these sort of profit maximizing corporations. So I will leave it there. Lizardandthemachine.com. I'm on Twitter at AlexM_bicameral or LinkedIn, whatever. Get in touch with me. Love to hear any questions from you guys. Love to have you guys help out on what we're trying to build here. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.